a little surprise for you, a little acknowledgement of your work to our community. So the first person I'm going to call, you know who you are, Dolores Allen Littles. Thank you so much, Dolores, for all your work. Okay, and then Jeff will just pass you your certificate. Next is Dr. Lorna Andrade. She's still doing a lot of work. She got to slow down.
No, I don't think so.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So next we have Dr. Francis Gaskin. Oh, and also, Fran, you did say that Anita Christian, you would give Anita's. So Anita Christian is not on the island right now, but very, very important to the 20th century. Black vacationers history, so we want to acknowledge that. Jocelyn Coleman Walton.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you show the certificate for me?
Oh,
Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, so the next two will just say their names. They couldn't be here with us today. Lee Van Allen. And Abigail McGrath.
I can take another guess.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are going to start our presentation. Okay. So the presentation kind of already got started, but we're celebrating the 20th century Black vacationers history. This was super important to me because I personally was not aware of the deep Black history in Martha's Vineyard, but so fascinated and this idea that we had a vacation history, because I was aware, you know, we're all aware of generational trauma, but we don't talk about generational joy. Like, how did we sustain all with everything, you know? Like how did we find peace? How did we, you know, rejuvenate ourselves? I remember hearing that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote his I Have a Dream speech on this island. And I was like, okay, I want to hear more about that. So that's kind of the interest I had in this work. I'm Nadia, I already introduced myself. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. So I'm Jeff Burnett. I'm from Massachusetts and live in New Bedford now, but I'm going to school at Michigan State University, and I'm an archaeologist and historian. And since 2019, I've been working on the history and culture and material culture of African American vacationers, particularly in the Highlands, and have done a project mapping Baptist Temple Park to preserve and learn more about Baptist Temple Park as a central site of that history. And as you'll see, the woman is working on a project recording and making public deed records and deed histories to track the property history, to look at what made the Highlands it is today, the people that made it that, and when people started coming here and how they got property and things like that, and all the questions that come with that, and ways in which class and race and gender may have shaped how people got here. And we've been working on that for almost a year now, just the data collection, and we've already got some interesting topics that we'll talk about, and we've also been learning more about the history of the families here, so we'll talk about a couple of the properties, and then we'll go on.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, we can stand up.
Okay, so you're just gonna keep that box on their head and squeeze this to move it. That's it. And then if it stops recording, you just hit that and you squeeze, squeeze that forward. Focus, but you don't need to do that.
Podium in the way that we can see.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, it might be.
Is the podium? Can everybody see it even on this side?
Are you here for this or the rest of
Out there now.
So what we'll talk about today is we'll go over some of the properties, including Dorothy West House, Sharer Cottage, and we'll introduce a property that I recently learned about. One of the earliest Black residents of the Highlands moved there right the day after this area started selling property, invested in the company, and really interesting gentleman from New Bedford. And then after that, I'll show you all a demonstration of the map project. And we can answer any questions or get feedback about that, particularly with people who have had family or currently live in the Highlands. So that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. Perfect. Yeah, we can.
And then we're gonna start with Dorothy West. Everybody knows Dorothy here. Raise your hands if you are not familiar with Dorothy West. Okay, good. We're in my room. Okay. So she's the last surviving member of the Renaissance, when her son was on the island with her family, prolific writer, and her, louder. Okay, so Dorothy's existence on the island actually led to her success in her writing. So she was actually able to be published because of the work she did on the island. She was a columnist for Vineyard Gazette, and her publisher was actually, she met her publisher through someone she met on circuit, Jacqueline Onassis, which somebody, you may have heard that name before too. So yeah, and she talks a lot about, in her work, she talks a lot about the island. So yeah, we're gonna talk about her property.
Yes. All right. Thank you. So Dorothy West and her family, the West, Benson, and Johnson family, I began visiting and owning property on the island in the early 20th century, late 19th century. They actually had a home with another family where our market is now that burned down. And then after that, they moved up to the Highlands, to Myrtle Avenue. Their neighbors were neighbors, our neighbors with Jocelyn and Jocelyn's family, and particularly her grandmother. And two houses, one that Dorothy West lived in, and one that now Abigail McGrath, her niece, lives in. They're 10 and 8 Myrtle Avenue. What was that? Her cousin, sorry, thank you. Her cousin. And the West, through Carrie Benson, purchased that property in the 1930s, that home that Dorothy West would live in, and for many years, eventually full-time or most of the year, and wrote a lot of her work in journalism and at the front porch of, which is an amazing property to have preserved and to have owned by people that knew her, neighbors and things like that, her family and her cousin and things like that. So
Also to interject, a lot of her stuff is at the museum. So when they do exhibits, you can actually see her desk, which was so tiny because she was such a little woman. But there was an exhibit last year, and I'm talking with the museum to see what we can do more regularly.
And so in our research, we did the property history for both homes, and we found that Carrie Benson purchased a home that Dorothy West lived in for many years in 1929, and left it to Dorothy West when she passed in the 60s. And then the house that Jocelyn McGrath lives in was
Abigail.
Thank you. Abigail McGrath lives in, was purchased in the 40s and was once owned by a gentleman who was part of the Vineyard Baptist Association, and he leased that property to the Baptist Association for their summer revivals there for 10 years or so, and then eventually sold it to them before it went into secular ownership and eventually made it to Dorothy West's hands. And there's a great story that involves your family about Dorothy West and your grandmother purchasing parts of Asbury Park from the Vineyard Grove Company at the original development company. They both bought portions on similar days and went to the deeds office around the same time, and that had to get fixed up in it. We found the deed records, and Dorothy West actually wrote, because your grandmother Coleman purchased only a small portion of Asbury Park, so Dorothy West wrote a letter to the deeds office saying, we can both separate that, we both bought it on the same day, not a problem, and it kind of was solved pretty amicably, which I think is a great story and something that you had always heard about growing up, if I remember correctly. Yeah, and so we were able to find kind of the paperwork on that and the writings from that. And so that's some of the information that we can know. We can learn about the previous owners, the situation that people came into, and information beyond that as well. And it's great that a lot of the houses we have records for are purchased by women and women of African descent, especially in that early period. And we found recently information about a person I never heard of, but a woman of African descent in the 40s and 50s who seemed to be buying and selling lots of property in this area, which is a great history. And the kind of those little known stories. So that's a little bit of Dorothy West. You all know more about her than I could ever know, but
Right.
That's a little bit about the property specific and some of the work that we can do.
So our next case study is going to be on Shearer Cottage. Sadly, Lee Van Allen couldn't be here due to COVID, unfortunately. But we're going to get her certificate and everything. So Shearer Cottage was actually like such an amazing space for me, just knowing that a Black woman made sure her name was on the deed. That was exciting, and the fact that these women were formerly enslaved, but they wanted a place of their own. So they were like, okay, we'll work all day, we're working for ourselves. So I was so inspired as a single Black woman that came from, you know, not the most privileged environment, that I could have a place on my own and I could, you know, work to create the life that I want to have. So I get a lot of inspiration from the Shearer family and really excited for one day Shearer Cottage to be open again. So I haven't lost hope. So yeah, as you know, as many of you know about Shearer Cottage, first Black Inn on the island. We have a picture, you're looking at pictures from the Shearer family of the Commodores singing for a wedding. And I think that's like Charles Shearer, top row, second from the left with family and friends at Shearer Cottage in 1918. So this history is actually super important to me because we've lost so much. So the things that haven't been lost, I feel like extra energy to fight to preserve it and keep it and build it back up. So that's how I feel about Shearer Cottage, and Jeff is just going to talk about some of the details of the property.
Yeah, so as Nadia was saying, was it?
And Charles Shearer. Sorry,
Yes.
I'm all about the women. Sorry, he's going to talk
But,
about Charles Shearer.
no, that's good, because Henrietta Shearer is, as Nadia mentioned, was bought the property in her own name, so alone in 1903. During those years, it was a laundry run by Henrietta and her daughters, and then after Henrietta passed, they converted the laundry facilities into an inn, and then in the 1920s expanded and continued to expand until their current state. And so Charles Shearer makes the secondary purchases, particularly after Henrietta Shearer passes, and his name is on the mortgages that they took out, but Henrietta made that first purchase in 1903. It was her business, and so I think that's a fantastic history. And we know that Charles Shearer had a connection again to the Baptists, and particularly the Tremont Temple Baptist Church in Boston, one of the first integrated church and the main organizer behind the Baptist revivals at Baptist Temple Park from the 1870s to the 1930s, which Charles Shearer, as deacon of that church, would have been involved in. Likely they vacationed, rented or owned property elsewhere in the islands before purchasing in 1903. So he was likely deeply involved with those events. And they purchased some of their property from the Vineyard Baptist Association to make Shearer Cottage as well. And one of the things that Lee Van Allen and I are looking into is that Lee remembers from her family hearing about the family owning property before Shearer Cottage on Moss Avenue, or at the very least renting, and we weren't able to find any evidence of that. We went through it pretty carefully, separately, but comparing notes. But we know that members of the Tremont Temple Baptist Church owned property on Moss Ave, so it's very likely that maybe that is what is being remembered, is that as a member